Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
You can tell a lot about a community not only from the values they say they stand up for, or the people they stand up to, but by the internal battles they fight. For example, when I grew up in the world of independent fundamental Baptists, we debated amongst ourselves whether or not women could wear pants, whether or not we should be KJV only or only use the KJV, and whether or not Southern gospel music was worldly. Then when I became a mainstream conservative evangelical complementarian Calvinist, we debated amongst ourselves whether or not women were allowed to be called deaconesses, or whether or not offering a soup kitchen to your community was the social gospel and thus a false gospel. In each of these cases, the internal battles we chose to have said something about the nature and values of our communities. So what do the internal battles of today's Republicans and Democrats say about the values of their parties? Let's start with the Democrats. Since the Republicans took over the entire federal government in January, the Democrats have struggled to accomplish much of anything. Then when the government shutdown happened, one of the biggest concerns of the Democrats was the skyrocketing healthcare costs that were about to happen. So as time went on, and as people were continuing to be hurt, and as people were no longer having the money to pay for food, eventually 8 Democratic senators decided to join the Republicans and vote to reopen the government. One of them was Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire. When Senate Majority Leader John Thune agreed to vote in December on the health subsidies, Shaheen said, quote, "This was the only deal on the table. It was our best chance to reopen the government and immediately begin negotiations to extend the ACA tax credits that tens of millions of Americans rely on to keep costs down," unquote. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois said, quote, "This bill is not perfect, but it takes important steps to reduce their shutdown's hurt. Not only would it fully fund SNAP for the year ahead, but it would reverse the mass firings the Trump administration ordered throughout the shutdown." Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia said the agreement was a moratorium on mischief, and added, quote, "The kinds of just non-strategic mass firings and reduction in force actions that have traumatized federal employees since Inauguration Day, they can't do them anymore," unquote. Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire said that she heard from families about the deep pain that the government shutdown has caused, made worse by a president who illegally and repeatedly chose to cut off help for families who are just trying to buy groceries. Senator Angus King of Maine said, quote, "The question was, does the shutdown further the goal of achieving some needed support for the extension of the tax credits? Our judgment was that it would not produce that result," unquote. Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada said that Republicans, quote, "are weaponizing their power in alarming ways to inflict unimaginable pain and suffering on working people, like fully withholding SNAP benefits and gutting our tourism industry by grinding air travel to a halt," unquote. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada spoke about lines at food banks and said that the stories were horrific. And then Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania said, quote, "I'm sorry to our military, SNAP recipients, government workers, and Capitol Police who haven't been paid in weeks. It should have never come to this. This was a failure," unquote. But despite these reasons, the overwhelming majority of Democrats did not vote to reopen the government, precisely because they received no guarantees that the healthcare subsidies would continue. So voting to open the government in order to feed the hungry and to get people their paychecks would simultaneously cause everyone's healthcare costs to skyrocket. Here was Senator Bernie Sanders in response.
Tonight, 8 Democrats voted with the Republicans to allow them to go forward on this continuing resolution. And to my mind, this was a very, very bad vote. What it does, first of all, is it raises healthcare premiums for over 20 million Americans by doubling, and in some cases tripling or quadrupling. People can't afford that when we are already paying the highest prices in the world for healthcare. Number 2, it paves the way for 15 million people to to be thrown off of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. Studies show that will mean that some 50,000 Americans will die every year unnecessarily. And all of that was done to give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1%. As everybody knows, just on Tuesday, we had an election all over this country. And what the election showed is that the American people want us to stand up to Trumpism, to his war against working class people, to his authoritarianism. That is what the American people wanted, but tonight, that is not what happened. So we've got to go forward, do the best that we can to try to protect working class people, to make sure that the United States not only does not throw people off of health care, but ends the absurdity of being the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people. We got a lot of work to do. But to be honest with you, tonight was not a good night. Thank you.
And here was Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
It is great. It is great that Democrats have a line of people who are willing to fight for working class Americans from coast to coast in this country, because God forbid that we have a member of the Republican caucus who stands up and actually wants to extend the Affordable Care Act so that people with cancer, insulin, and issues across all sorts of healthcare issues across this country have their health insurance protected and extended throughout 2026. It is unconscionable that what we are debating right now is legislation that will give 8 members of the United States Senate over $1 million apiece. And we are robbing people of their food assistance and of their health care to pay for it. How is this even on the floor? How can we, as members of Congress, Republican or Democrat, vote to enrich ourselves by stealing from the American people? That is what this legislation does. In fact, Senator Graham just went before the press earlier today saying he was going to seek well over $1 million from the American people from this. We cannot support it, and we cannot stand for it. Thank you.
Then in a conversation with CNN, Ocasio-Cortez spoke of the Democrats responding with cowardice in the face of Republican cruelty.
And on the shutdown, how would you characterize the way that Senator Schumer handled this shutdown?
I think it's important that we understand that this is not just about Senator Schumer, but that this is about the Democratic Party. Senator Schumer, there was no one vote that ended this shutdown. We are talking about a coordinated effort of 8 senators with the knowledge of Leader Schumer voting to break with the entire Democratic Party in exchange for nothing. And now people's health care costs are going to be skyrocketing, and we want to make sure that we have a path to ending this moment and finding relief for them right now. But I think that when we talk about this debate about the Democratic Party, it is indeed about the party writ large and our ability to fight or not.
And here's what the minority leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, had to say.
House Democrats are here on the Capitol steps to reiterate our strong opposition to this spending bill because it fails to address the Republican health care crisis and it fails to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits. House Democrats will continue to support our men and women in uniform. We will continue to support hardworking federal employees. We will continue to support our law enforcement personnel. House Democrats will continue to support our air traffic controllers. We will continue to support our TSA agents. We will continue to support our civil servants who have been under attack since day one of the Trump administration. But we cannot support the Republican effort to gut the health care of the American people. Today, House Democrats will introduce legislation to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits for 3 years to make sure that tens of millions of Americans don't experience dramatically increased premiums, copays, and deductibles. We believe that working class Americans, middle class Americans, and everyday Americans deserve the same level of certainty that Republicans always provide to the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. The same level of certainty. And so we're calling upon our Republican colleagues to join us and extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And we will be working hard today, tomorrow, and throughout the balance of this year to make sure that those Affordable Care Act tax credits are extended.
And California Governor Gavin Newsom, who many see as the current frontrunner for the Democratic nominee for president in 2028, responded to the deal by simply posting the word pathetic. So the Republicans aren't the only ones facing a civil war right now. The Democrats also have a very deep divide. But again, going back to our opening question, what are the internal debates about? For the Democrats, the Civil War is about trying to minimize the harm that comes from the Republican cruelty of withholding paychecks, cutting food aid, and causing health care costs to skyrocket. In other words, they're fighting to feed and care for people, and have very different ideas regarding how to accomplish that in light of their lack of power. On the other hand, the Republicans who are in power, who do hold all the cards, are having a civil war about whether or not to allow anti-Semites into their party, whether or not to release the Epstein files, or whether Candace Owens claimed Erica Kirk ordered the assassination of her husband Charlie. In fact, Owens has been going after Turning Point so hard that she actually spent time on one of her shows this week quoting from one of my pieces that I wrote for Baptist News Global back in 2023 about the militant faith leaders who support Trump. The battle over including anti-Semites has gotten so over the top that Tucker Carlson started sharing more details about how he supposedly was attacked and scratched by a demon in the middle of the night without his wife and 4 dogs who he sleeps with waking up. And then Dinesh D'Souza posted an AI video of Carlson screaming while a red-eyed demon behind him scratches at his chest. Then regarding the Epstein files, the Trump administration is so desperate to keep the files from being released that they summoned Lauren Boebert in an attempt to convince her to change her mind about voting to release the files.
Breaking news, CNN has learned there will be a meeting today inside the White House as aides try to manage a potential House vote on the release of the Epstein files. This comes, of course, just hours after Democrats on the Oversight Committee released emails from Jeffrey Epstein himself mentioning Donald Trump by name multiple times. I want to get straight to CNN's Caitlin Polantz. Caitlin, what are you learning?
Well, the House is releasing these files, but it's not everything that the federal government has. Dana, there's additional files still held by the Justice Department that some Republicans on Capitol Hill are in support of releasing. And so that is causing a political response inside the White House right now, where there is a meeting planned, or was a meeting planned today, about the House effort to try and force a vote to get the Justice Department, the Trump administration, to release the rest of the FBI files, the Justice Department files, everything from years of the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and others, things that have not seen the light of day yet. What one source tells me, we have multiple sources confirming that this meeting is happening, but what one source tells me is that this meeting was planning to include some key figures from the Justice Department, the FBI Director Kash Patel, the Attorney General Pam Bondi, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and then one of those Republicans in support of transparency, Republican Representative Lauren Boebert of Colorado. So what might happen at this meeting if Boebert could be swayed in a different direction on wanting transparency here? That is all something that is going to be at issue, and that the White House is clearly concerned about, having discussions about it. On top of that, Dana, another thing to remember here is that the Justice Department has tried many different ways to distract from releasing the full Justice Department files. They tried to get grand jury records out there. Blanche talked to Ghislaine Maxwell, a co-conspirator in Florida. When Ghislaine spoke to Todd Blanche, she told him that Trump himself never acted inappropriately, and she never saw anything untoward in any way toward underage girls. Dana?
Yeah. But she also said he was never at the House, and in the email, Epstein said he was at the House. So this is going to be a very interesting meeting. The fact that Lauren Boebert is going to be there is especially fascinating.
The Republican Civil War is about harboring Nazis and pedophiles. And they aren't even debating the actions of ICE or extending health care or funding food benefits. Those things aren't worth debating. They're just accepted. But harboring Nazis and pedophiles? that deserves their attention. And much of the attention by some of their most popular influencers is sympathetic to harboring Nazis and pedophiles. So then, when White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt was asked why the White House is pressuring GOP Congress members into not releasing the Epstein files, when so many of them campaign on the fact that they would, here's how Leavitt responded.
Given your interest in transparency, Caroline, why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please? Doesn't that show our level of transparency? Doesn't that show the level of transparency when we are willing to sit down with members of Congress and address their concerns? That is that's a defining factor of transparency, having discussions with members of Congress about various issues. And I'm not going to detail conversations that took place in the Situation Room, in the press briefing room.
To Leavitt, meeting with members of Congress to pressure them into hiding the Epstein files is transparently addressing the concerns of Congress, which she conveniently can't discuss. It's so dishonest. The contrast between these two parties could not be more clear right now, as evidenced in the things that they are arguing amongst themselves about. Sure, they're both having internal civil wars for the identity and future of their parties, but one is having an intense civil war about how to feed people and extend their health care coverage, while the other party is having an intense civil war about including Nazis and pedophiles, fighting demons in your sleep, or assassinating your husband. Nobody on the left is saying we need to let people starve or go without medical care. They're simply fighting about how to help these vulnerable communities. But a lot of people on the right, including those in places of highest power, are saying that Nazis deserve to be platformed and pedophiles deserve to be protected. So you can decide for yourself what these internal party debates say about the nature and values of their parties. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.